Ago Medasi, Akwaba. Just a little West African Fante for you. Just saying attention, please, thank you, and welcome. Welcome, 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 Akwaba. We are so happy for those of you that are joining us for this special Wednesday night edition of our Sunday workshop series for the All African People's Revolutionary Party. You know it's May, so you know what that means. It's African Liberation Day, May 25th, the official designation. And we have two events, webcasts this year. We have an event Sunday, the 22nd. You're not going to want to miss it. And a follow-up event on Tuesday, the 25th. You're not going to want to miss it. And if you happen to be on the ground in Africa or Europe, we have on-the-ground events that we are helping facilitate in Johannesburg, Azania, or what they call South Africa, in Zimbabwe, Nairobi, Kenya, in Accra, Ghana, Takoradi, Ghana, in Dakar, Senegal, and of course, in Guinea-Bissau. And also we have events happening in Germany as well, in Hamburg, Germany, for the A-APRP and African Liberation Day. So glad you can join us for this special Wednesday night edition and a very important topic, Malcolm X on his 96th birthday. It's also the born day for a great activist, Yuri Kochiyama, who is a comrade of Malcolm X, of course, and also our great uncle, Nguyen Ao Thach, who is better known as Ho Chi Minh, the leader of the Vietnamese resistance against American imperialism, and also Lorraine Hansberry, who was an outstanding activist, playwright, writer, and contributor to our forward struggle. So we honor all four of them and all of the African masses today. And we thank you for joining us and all masses of people struggling for justice in the world. We honor. And we really appreciate you coming in. And we start, as we always do, by the land recognition. I sit here on Miwok land of the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. And we acknowledge that this is their land and they fight for their land back every single day. And we respect and support their effort to regain their land back. It's theirs. It belongs to them. It does not belong to you if you're not American Indian, so, or any of their descendants. And so you need another plan if your plan is around identifying as American and not recognizing that you are on stolen land. And also, of course, we honor our African ancestors, and African Liberation Day is nothing except a commemoration of our African legacy of struggle and resistance and development and forward progress. So we honor the ancestors who are the only reason that we are sitting here living and breathing today. And so we're thankful for you all for being here. We hope you're in your highest level of mental, physical, and spiritual health. And we think you will benefit immensely from this next week of African Liberation Day activities that the All African People's Revolutionary Party has sponsored. We'll give you information about other activities at the end of this program. This is one of those programs as a part of that effort. And so we thank you very much for being here as we talk about Malcolm X and African Liberation Day. And before we begin, just a quick notice of comments. We have our comrade family from the American Indian Movement commenting that they have family that are from the Miwok people. That is definitely something we appreciate you bringing up. As I sit here every day, I think of the Miwok people every day. And so I think of your family and I think of this land and one day it being rightfully returned to them. And whether I live to see that or not, I know that one day that will happen. So thank you all for joining us. And a little different format today, but we're just going to go right into the program. And so I'm just going to turn it right over to Shukura to get us started with our topic matter, Malcolm X and African Liberation Day.
Good evening, good day, good afternoon, everyone. We hope that you are well and hanging in there as best you can. So I wanted to start us off by helping us understand that we need to make sure that we keep in mind that Malcolm showed us how progressive this process can be in terms of incorporating Pan-Africanism into your alignment. So if you are, unsettled or unsure, especially from the last couple of weeks of us talking straight from the book, The Manifesto, A Guide for Organizing Defense, and you're still not sure how you would go about making that transition, if that's something that you're interested in doing, you should really study the teachings of Malcolm X. My dad has alluded to the Final Speeches of Malcolm, which is a book that I recently ordered. And I would encourage you to purchase that or see if you can rent it or however that looks, so that you can get a better idea of that and go into it looking at the frame from how he looked at it. He didn't start off as a revolutionary. He didn't start off as a Pan-Africanist. He had to develop into that. He evolved into that. And so we want to make sure that we continue to think about that, especially because some people might be born revolutionaries, but I would imagine even those who are born revolutionaries still need to develop that process as they go, because we've already said we all have a lot to learn, right? And even when we think we know everything, there's still so much that we have no idea about. And if we humble ourselves, then we'll see that to be true. So I just want to start us off with that. And just, again, just be open to the fact that, you still might be unsure, and use this opportunity for this presentation to kind of help you get a better idea of what that looks like. The next slide is going to go into more specifics on how he started that evolution process. Next slide. So when we think about Malcolm, the first thing I want to mention to us is, once he transformed his life to that of being a servant for the people, Malcolm's commitment to that principle could never be compromised. So again, we talked about last week and the week before about your principles and sticking to them and letting people know, standing up for them, fighting for your principles in some cases, because if you are not easily changing your principles left and right, then people start to develop consistency when they look at you, and they start to develop that one of your characteristics is consistency. And beyond that, that you have no problem letting anyone and everyone know what you believe for, which means that in theory, you would die for it if you really do believe in it, and if it is something that is non-negotiable for you. And Malcolm showed us that. This is what made him so intimidating to so many people. He constantly demonstrated that standing by principle was the best way to behave, because he knew that many of our people have not yet been taught how to do this. He also was unapologetic about the belief and support and being in an organization. So again, we always tie it back to the party's line of joining some organization that's working for justice, right? This principle also caused Malcolm to develop deep conflicts within the Nation of Islam, as many of his leadership there, particularly Elijah Muhammad's family, saw the Nation of Islam as a vehicle to their personal stability and wealth, not for African liberation. This became the creation that would enhance Malcolm's revolutionary attitude and approach. And then last but not least, let's continue to remember that even while still in the Nation of Islam, Malcolm gave clear signs of his increasing radicalism. For example, after the Nation of Islam member Ronald Stokes was killed by the LAPD in 1962, in Malcolm's eyes, the role of the Nation of Islam was to seek maximum retaliation against the police. The Nation of Islam leadership talked him down and away from any such ideas. Malcolm began to understand that reaching African liberation would need to be accomplished and pursued through alternative avenues. Next slide, please. Malcolm was an honest man, so his quest led him to study and seek out objective truths, i.e., until Africa is free, Africans everywhere will continue to have serious challenges. This stands to reason that Africa's oppression overflows from the continent and spills onto the Africans who descend from there. This is evident when we think about Africa's treatment as exploited land for resources that are stolen, and people who descend from there no longer serve the same purpose for working as slaves. Thus, Africans in this case, nowadays, in today's society and time, thus Africans and nowadays are in the way for most capitalists and imperialists because they no longer serve the purpose that they once served. For Malcolm, his commitment to Pan-Africanism required much more than just talking about it. He wanted to develop a program to help it come into existence. His creation of the Organization of Afro-American Unity, also known as the OAAU, was a clear attempt on his part to bring Pan-African organizing into the African community in the US. Again, it is evident that Malcolm had credibility and clout. So using his social capital, he was able to draw interest in joining the OAAU. It is also necessary and beneficial for African people for him to demonstrate the significance of uniting Pan-Africanism teachings into organizing spaces for Africans in the US. More often than not, we are taught that Africans in the US are separate from Africans on the continent, and separate from Africans in Costa Rica, and separate from Africans in Cuba, and separate from all these other Africans all over the world. And so that's why we started with the quote of reminding us that Africans everywhere will continue to have challenges until Africa is free, because no matter where you were born, if you have African descent blood in you, then you are in fact African, and you can never ever deny or refute that. So for Malcolm, that was his way of understanding we need to tie in Pan-Africanism into anything that we do here in the US, because that's literally, without tying in Pan-Africanism into any organizing space for African people, that's like driving a car without tires and a steering wheel. Like, how is that possible? And how are you going to guide the direction that you are going in that car? Unless you have this conversation where you start with the foundation, which of course is Africa. So Malcolm understood that, and he wanted to make sure that there was no conversation without any action that regarded Africans and their revolution without talking about how Africa is exploited. The two are not mutually exclusive. Africans will not receive justice or be free until Africa is no longer captivated and enslaved, as we know from imperialist and colonialist methods. And then the last thing I'll say for this slide is his work in this area enhanced his analysis to the point where he knew that there was no solution within the capitalist system. That's the pivotal breaking point that I want to highlight. So he realized that in working with the OAAU, that, okay, no matter how we approach this system is still set up to deconstruct our efforts and to still make sure that it maintains its oppression over us. So capitalism is not the answer. So he was not accepting of this whole buy a Mercedes-Benz, get a white picket fence, and go to college and get a 4-year degree. And of course, I'm not knocking people who have chose to live that lifestyle. You all know that I'm in school getting my doctorate degree, but my plan is to try to use my degree to literally free the masses of people and to end oppression for all, because I personally am sick of it, and I'm sick of African women dying when they give birth. And I want to make sure that I do my part, which means I need to be thoroughly educated on all the isms that can contribute to why a person would not be able to live a life that is deemed quality. And part of that means understanding that organizing is important, because we have to look to what the roots of the causes of problems are so that we can know how to address them as a collective mass unit. So Malcolm understood that capitalism was not the system for us. And once he understood that, this was the moment when he realized that it was pointless to try to, quote, settle into the system. And again, I would argue we should use all these tools that we have. I forget what the definition is, but my dad has it in the glossary. But there's a method where you use the same tools that capitalism gives you, and you turn it and use it against capitalism. And that's what I think Malcolm was trying to do with that. He realized that this idea of trying to just live in a system that didn't value him wasn't going to work anymore. And so he realized that he wanted to find some new approaches within the within the OAAU, but also within other organizations, to help Africans understand that Africa must be free, and to tie in this Pan-Africanism so that we can work towards freedom and justice. Next slide, please.
I think that's yours. I think mine is the next one.
Oh, apologies. Okay.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you for that. You know, I want to say, because I know she won't say it, Shukura was on a plane. I know this because she was here, and she flew across country. I know that because I took her to the airport early in the AM, and she insisted upon still being available to do her part of this presentation. So I just want to point that out, because we believe in honoring each other while we're still here. You know, when Malcolm was alive, when King was alive, they were scorned. Even a lot of people running around here today claiming that they supported them, scorned them when they were alive. And so we don't believe in that. We believe that we should be acknowledging people's contributions today. So I want to acknowledge that I helped raise a soldier, and you can do that too. You just need to start. You can look at the presentation we did last week. That's exactly what we talked about. But for tonight, we are talking about Malcolm X and African Liberation Day. And Shukura has given a pretty good foundation of the principled reality in which Malcolm X operated. But I wanted to just make sure people understand what we're talking about when we say African Liberation Day. So using US imperialism, for example, their shine and glory, their day is the 4th of July. That's the day for US imperialism, because that's the day that they trot out all their red, white, and blue colors and all their activities and fireworks and parades and all of that. And the reason why they do all of that is they are perpetuating the propaganda that this society developed into a free and democratic society that everybody in the world wants to emulate, and that everybody that lives here should be honored, excited, and dedicated to building this empire for the multinational capitalist corporations they're running. And that's why they promote that every 4th of July. You pay attention if you haven't before. When it comes up, you can already go in the supermarkets, and this is May, and you can see they've got all the stuff out there for you to buy it. The fireworks are already out. The flags are out. Everything's out. And even in church, you can go to church on their 4th of, we call it July, and they will talk about, even the preachers in the churches will talk about what a wonderful country this is. So they use the 4th of July as their propaganda mechanism to advance the values of their backward decadent system. And they use all their holidays to do that. So us being political scientists, because revolution is a science, it's not sentimental, it's not subjective, it's based on scientific principles, then we know that we also have to create revolutionary Pan-African institutions to organize and educate our people and all of humanity about the necessity for Africa to be free, unified, and socialist. And in concert with that, the necessity for Ireland to be free and unified, the necessity for Palestine to be free and unified, for the Philippines to be free and unified, for the indigenous lands of the Western Hemisphere to be free and unified, and all of the other masses of people across the planet Earth to be free from the vestiges and oppression of capitalism and imperialism. So that, my friends and enemies, is the purpose of African Liberation Day. And when Kwame Nkrumah created the concept, which was then called Africa Freedom Day, for April 15th, 1958, that was the idea behind it. And then in May of 1963, it was changed to African Liberation Day. And now some neo-colonialist elements on the continent want to change it to Africa Day because they don't want that word liberation in there, because that right there is a direct contradiction to the class struggle between the haves and the have-nots, the capitalist classes and the masses of humanity. We want that word in there. That's why we're not calling it African Day. We're calling it African Liberation Day, how Nkrumah had it, because we still need liberation. And we know African Liberation Day is simply, as Kwame Ture told us countless times, a tool, a mechanism, an instrument for us to use to advance the concept of Pan-Africanism, that our people are the same no matter where we are on earth. Only an absolute idiot would argue against that logic and that history, because our people are where we are, scattered in 120 countries across the globe because of colonialism and slavery. There is no other reason why we're where we are. If you're African listening to me right now and you're in the Western Hemisphere, there is no other reason why you're here other than that. It doesn't matter if you were born in Nigeria and you came here to go to school. Why couldn't you have gone to school in Nigeria? because colonialism was set up so that you had to come to the centers of imperialism and capitalism to get an education, because the only purpose for getting an education under this system is so that you can serve their interests. You can use the skills that you learn to serve their interests and continue to advance their empire. So there is no other reason for us to be in the situation we're in today other than colonialism and slavery and the development of capitalism, the system that has institutionalized our oppression for hundreds of years. And so that's why we say Pan-Africanism is our solution, because what Pan-Africanism will come to do, and that's why we have the theme this year for African Liberation Day of Forward to Worldwide Pan-African Unity. Forward to Worldwide Pan-African Unity. And the reason why we have that theme and our focus for African Liberation Day on Pan-Africanism and worldwide unity is because we know that once we have one unified socialist Africa, y'all got to understand that will change the game in terms of how the world functions. Because now, as it is, these multinational corporations control governments, and as a result of that, they force governments to make policy decisions that serve their interests. They force governments to make policy decisions that serve their interests. Oil companies force governments to make policy decisions that serve their interests. And when things are not going the way they want them to go, they will force governments to go to war. I hope I don't have to name the number of wars that have been fought because of oil companies for you. If you don't know that, then that's the first place you need to go to work to enhance your knowledge, because there's no question that that's what happened. And every single one of these wars is about multinational corporate interests. So once we have Pan-Africanism, then these resources that they will kill millions to control, now once we organize, unite, and seize power from them, we regain it as African people. Now we're looking at a continent where we can begin to use the wealth generated from the columbite, tantalite, or cobalt, or coltan, the uranium, the gold, the diamonds, the silver, the zinc, the steel, the rubber, the oil, the bauxite, the phosphates, all of those things, cocoa, that the capitalist corporations rely on today. Now they belong to us after we have a revolutionary process and seize them back. And by revolutionary, we mean we run the multinational capitalists out of Africa. And by doing that, we run them out of everywhere else, because without control of the African resources, they will not have the capacity to control the world the way they do today. And then once we have control of those resources, now we can build up Africa's infrastructure. We can create the roads that are needed. We can create the bridges that are needed. We can create all of the housing that's needed. And how do you pay for that? You pay for that with all that wealth that right now is recording record profits for Apple and Samsung and Motorola and Shell and Chevron and Firestone and all of those crooks and criminals, De Beers. That's where the money is right now. And we get it back. We have it to build that infrastructure, and we have it to build our schools so that we have education for our children all throughout Africa, all throughout wherever our children are in Europe, all throughout wherever our children are in the Americas. Then we can build a federation relationship with African nations like Jamaica and Haiti so that we can help them, because they're in the situation they're in because of colonialism and slavery. So now they are a part of the worldwide African nation. And so all of these resources are utilized to ensure that they have the infrastructure and the schools. And we can ensure that women and women identifying people, there's education to respect them, and that all these backward ideologies like patriarchy and homophobia and white supremacy are wiped out of the African world. And by doing that, we wipe them out of the entire world. And we can build a foundation for future generations to live based on justice and peace, because now with Pan-Africanism, we have the power to do so. So that's what African Liberation Day is all about, you all. And the reason why we're talking about it in connection to El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, Malcolm X's 96th born day today is because there are no better manifestations of Pan-Africanist values, revolutionary Pan-Africanist values than Brother Malcolm. No manifestation better than Brother Malcolm. Brother Malcolm is the reason I'm here today. There is no question about that. He has been my ideological father for my entire life. Why? Because it was through his analysis that I was able to understand what my focus in life needed to be about, how I was able to connect my world and reality growing up in the inner city in one of these backward communities in this backward country, and recognizing that I was bigger than what they said I was. And I was not what they told me I was. I was never going to be what they said I was going to be. That I always was and always will be an African and always will be connected to Africa. It was his ability to break that down that allowed me to understand it. I didn't go straight to Kwame Nkrumah and Sekou Touré and Amilcar Cabral. I didn't understand what they were talking about. I didn't even go straight to Kwame Touré. It was Malcolm X who paved the way for me to be exposed to all the things that represent my life, that made me understand the values that I used to raise my daughter, that made me understand the necessity to do the work that I do every single day. So that's why we talk about Malcolm X as it relates to African Liberation Day and Pan-Africanism, because a lot of people out here today want to confuse us about Malcolm X. A lot of people want to confuse us about Malcolm X. You got all these books coming out. This biography that came out last year, Rising, whatever it was, I read it. I wrote a review about it. You can go to betterworld.me and see it, but I don't even remember the name. The name wasn't even worth remembering. The Dead Rising, that's the name of it. That book's coming out. They got the documentary last year, Who Killed Malcolm X? That's coming out. All this stuff is coming out. None of that stuff is telling you what was so essential about this man. They want you to believe that, well, what's essential about him is that he stopped being a criminal and he stopped eating pork and he stopped chasing European women and he started organizing with discipline for our people. Yeah, those are critical things, and he did do all of those things, but those were not the things that got this man killed. That's not what did it, you all. What did it was the work he did to connect our people to Africa. That's what got him 16 bullets in his body on February 21st, 1965. So that's why we're talking about Malcolm X, because we know that if Malcolm X was still here today talking about white devils, or if he was still talking about if he never stopped talking about white devils, we know he would still be here at 96 years of age talking about white devils, because the white devils don't care nothing about you calling them white devils, as long as at the end of the day, they own and control the means of production. You can call them devils all day, but as long as that's all you're doing and you're doing nothing to organize and challenge their control of the means of production, they don't care about you calling them devils. In fact, they'll create corporations like Kinko's and promotions companies to help you better refine how you call them devil. That's what they'll do. They'll make money off of you calling them devil, because that's how they operate. They have no souls, so they don't care about that. But what they do care about are people like El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, who organize and know how to develop a message that resonates with the masses of people. When he says, when a cat has kittens in the ovens, you don't call them biscuits. That's still something that resonates almost 60 years after he said it. When he said that you cannot separate the tree from the roots, that still resonates 60 years after he said it. It'll resonate 500 years after he said it, because it's true. It's irrefutable. And it's related to his understanding that we're Africans, and he had the skills and ability to develop ways to help us understand that in ways that we could relate to. And that is why he had to go. That is the reason. It didn't have nothing to do with Elijah Muhammad, Louis Farrakhan, none of those people. It had nothing to do with that. It had to do with the work he was doing to advance our people towards Pan-Africanism. And that's why we have to study so we can understand that. And we appreciate those who are participating today so that you can hear that message and hopefully begin to promote that message so that we can understand the real reason why Malcolm X was assassinated. And we want to focus on, and I just want to look at the comments, right? And people saying wonderful things, talking about how Malcolm, went to the UN and he wanted to talk about the treatment of our people in the UN. Yes, Malcolm wanted to do that, but again, that was not what got him killed. What got him killed was what we're about to talk about, the work he was doing to contribute to a worldwide revolutionary effort. These people are only afraid of one thing. The United Snakes contributes 44% of the budget used by the United Nations to function and operate. As a result of that, the United Nations, or leading up to that, rather, the United Nations, was founded in Connecticut in 1944. So the United Snakes has always controlled the United Nations. They were never under any confusion that the United Nations would serve a purpose of bringing liberation to the world. So they didn't kill Malcolm because he was going to the UN, because if you look at the function of the UN, it's always served as nothing except a rubber stamp for imperialism. That's why the UN can't even come up with a strong anti-Zionist statement against the murder and genocide being carried out against the Palestinian people. It's too impotent to even do that. Why? And if you look at the history, every time there's an honest effort to bring something before the UN to address injustices in the world, who vetoes it? The United Snakes, the Zionist state of Israel, and just based on the power that they hold in the institution, they're always able to override any effort to bring any justice through the United Nations. So Malcolm understood that, just like we understand that today. And so that's why that wasn't his whole, that was one of the things that he was working on. But we would argue his main focus was around the organizing work that you're not going to see in the Dead Rising book, that you're not going to read about in that book. You're not going to see in that terrible documentary produced by that dude, Rahman Muhammad. That was an awful documentary. If you think it was good, I'm going to tell you right now, you don't know anything about Malcolm X. I'm sorry. I'm not sorry, because it's true. You don't know. You got a lot of work to do if you think that documentary was worth anything. It was absolutely terrible. If you think Spike Lee's movie was any good, you really know even less than what I just said about Malcolm X. So you got a ton of work to do if you want to understand the work about that Malcolm was doing that is not in any of those books. That's why we're talking about, not in any of those documentaries, not in any of those movies. It wasn't in A Night in Miami. They didn't even talk about Malcolm's work in that show. That's why it's worthless to us. It's good to you because you want to be entertained and you don't really want to seriously study what Malcolm was doing. But for those of us who want to engage in organizing revolution, we're not trying to be entertained by the people who give us inspiration to fight for our freedom. That in and of itself is all the inspiration and entertainment that we need. All we want to do is help others understand what these people were really doing underneath all that confusion so that we can wipe away the confusion and get to work. So when we talk about Malcolm and examining Malcolm's example, what we're talking about here is when he said, the chickens coming home to roost in December of 1963. This was an outstanding statement. You all, if you're not familiar with it, you need to get familiar with it. When he was asked, he was on suspension. Elijah Muhammad told him, don't say anything because the country loves our president. You can take that for what it is. That's what the man said. The country loves our president. And Malcolm was asked what he thought about the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And Malcolm responded, I'm an old country boy. And when I was a country boy, the chickens would fly off, and then the ones who figured it out would fly back. And chickens coming home to roost never made me sad. And he talked about how John F. Kennedy oversaw the destabilization of the Congo, where the National Congolese Movement, Patrice Lumumba, Maurice Mupalo, and all the leaders of the MNC were leading the Congolese people to control to have a liberation process to free the Congo. The Congo's the most minerally rich area in Africa, and Africa's the most minerally rich area in the world. And the imperialists couldn't have that, so they brought sabotage. And your Central Intelligence Agency, Criminals in Action, CIA, they organized through Frank Carlucci, the station chief for the CIA in the Congo. They assassinated Patrice Lumumba, Maurice Mupalo, and the other leaders of the MNC. They dissolved their bodies in acid, and they engaged on a destabilization campaign in the Congo in 1961 that the Congo still hasn't recovered from in 2021. And Malcolm articulated all of that on December 1st, 1963. And it was a brilliant display of how to connect us, because he talked about how what was happening in the Congo, as he said, was the same thing happening in Mississippi. And this was a way to help our people understand our connection to Africa. And it was an outstanding statement. And even if you didn't pay attention to it, and your parents didn't, and your grandparents didn't, our enemies did. And they recognized that this man is connecting with these people. And if we don't do something, they're going to figure this thing out. And so that is why that was such an astute statement that he made. And then his framing of our people as Africans and his unique way of doing it in creative ways that would resonate with us. Like I said, when a cat has kittens in the oven, you don't call them biscuits. That nobody can argue with that. That's a brilliant way of eliminating all this identity confusion. Well, I was born in an American, I'm an American. I went to an African Methodist Episcopalian church, right? African AME church, right? Why is it not called African American Methodist Episcopalian Church? Y'all got to start asking these kind of questions. Why is it not called that? If that's what you are, why is it not called the Black Methodist Episcopalian Church? It's not any of that. It's the African Methodist Episcopalian Church. Some of y'all grew up in AME churches and you never thought about that once. So we're going to think about it right now. Why? Because the AME church was our first church that we established in this country. And it was done at a time hundreds of years ago when we were not confused like we are today about who we are. So we named it for who we are. That's why. And I give honor to the people in the church that they at least have held sway, because I know at some point, some people, why don't we change it to Black or African American or Negro or just American? And somebody had sense enough to recognize what that represented. Well, a lot of what we understand about that is because of Malcolm's example and how he brought the conversation to us. Outstanding and very influential in terms of how we think about this. And his dedication and commitment to living his ideals made his developing Pan-African revolutionary ideals credible, because people respected him. That made them want to understand more what he was talking about, because he had credibility. He was not saying one thing over here and then stealing from the people over here. He was not saying one thing to divide our people over here and then talking about he wanted to unite our people over here. He was not mistreating, abusing, sexually assaulting our women and women identifying people over here and then talking about we're a people unified over here. He was not oppressing our children over here. He was consistent with his message and his actions. I hope y'all can hear that, because most of us ain't consistent. And that's why people ain't listening to us. And it's causing us to work that much harder, those of us that are serious, to try to get the message. I know this because I deal with this every day. Well, this person, every time I'm talking to someone about getting organized, they start talking to me about somebody who was faking the funk. So that's why I know that's real all the time. And that's not an excuse for them not to do it, but I'm saying you do make it harder. Just like those of you that are men that practice patriarchy, you make it harder for those of us who are trying to be real men out here. You make it harder for us with women who are trying to be real men because of your nonsense and foolishness. And so Malcolm, because of his consistent commitment to the values he represented, made a major contribution to that. All right. And then some of these essentials of Malcolm's work, his developing relationships. He traveled to Africa 3 times, 2 times in 1964. We're going to talk about the 1964 trips, which you don't know. You know, he went there twice. You know that. You know, he went to and did the Hajj in the Middle East. You know that. You know that. You know all of that. You know, he went to Mecca. You know that because you watched the movie. And for a lot of you, that's all you did. So that's why you know. You maybe read the autobiography, but that's all you did. That's all you know. But because we don't study Malcolm, that's all we know. We don't know. Most of his time was spent in Africa in those trips, meeting with African revolutionaries. He didn't go to Africa and just say, well, I just want to sit here and meet with some of the colonial people. That wasn't what he was doing. That's what some of us today would do. Well, I want to go over there and try to get with the British Queen. He wasn't going over there to talk to that woman. He was going there to deal with African revolutionaries. And that's what he did. He had multiple meetings with Kwame Nkrumah in Africa, in Ghana. What happened in those meetings? You don't know, because you haven't even had the slightest inkling to examine it. All this stuff about Malcolm X. And nobody wants to, like, what was he doing in our, why was he talking to those people? What were they talking about? Well, they just talked about baseball. They just talked about Bill Russell and the Boston Celtics. That's what Malcolm and Kwame Nkrumah talked about, right? I mean, that must be it, because you didn't even think, well, maybe we should examine what those meetings were about. Because if we do that, we know that what those people were setting up was a worldwide network of Pan-African revolutionaries. You think that Malcolm came back from those trips and named his organization the Organization of Afro-American Unity after the Organization of African Unity that Nkrumah founded. We know that those organizations were not the solution, but this is almost 60 years ago. We didn't know that then. We thought those were the vehicles that would bring us where we wanted to go. We sincerely thought that. Nkrumah sincerely thought that. So that's not the point. The point is that you never thought once, why would he name his organization after Nkrumah's organization unless they were clearly developing some sort of common working philosophy and action? Why didn't we do that? And we know that Ghanaian intelligence, all types of people talked about this. Julia Wright, Richard Wright's daughter, talked about it. All types of people talked about how when Malcolm met with Nkrumah, Nkrumah told him that the work that we're doing has the concern of your CIA in the United States. And our Ghanaian intelligence services are telling us that they are planning to assassinate you. This is what Nkrumah told Malcolm. And my lieutenants are sure that this is reliable information. And Nkrumah offered Malcolm to stay in Ghana. Don't even go back there. Just stay here so we can continue our work. And Malcolm didn't feel like he could do that. And so when people say, yeah, Malcolm knew he was going to be killed. Well, yeah, he did know, but not for the reasons you think. Because you think, well, he just knew because some voice in his head from the mothership told him he was going to be killed. No, he knew because the intelligence forces on the ground had intercepted the messages and understood that and relayed that to him because they were working in unison to bring about a network to free our people all over the world. And that's what that was all about. That's why he understood that. And that's why he started talking like he did when he came back to the States. And he said, I no longer think the Muslims are behind all these attacks against me. These attacks are bigger than what the Muslims could be. And you never even thought 3 times about, well, why would he say that? What was that based on? You got to think about that because this is how they dupe us. When Malcolm said, we've been bamboozled, you've been fooled, you've been misled. That's what he's talking about. We can't let these people do our thinking for us. We got to think for ourselves. And if we do that, we understand that Malcolm was a critical force in the work taking place, and they had to stop him for that. His budding relationships with the Cuban Revolution. When Castro met with Malcolm in 1960, he maintained contact with the Cuban Revolution. And they were trying to build this network and make Malcolm one of the key spokespersons for this network because of the respect that he garnered as a spokesperson for African liberation in the United States. You don't have anybody today that you're looking at who could perform that function. Who could do that? Look at what you got today. Cornel West, Tavis Smiley, Raphael Warnock. These people can't even vomit in Malcolm X's socks. You put all of them, wind them all up together, and you don't have anyone that can even clean Malcolm's underwear. We're talking about principled people who are uncompromising and unwilling to compromise with the enemies of humanity. And so this is the work that he was engaged in with the Cuban revolutionaries, who are also have the same level of principled commitment to revolutionary struggle. And this is, again, what our enemies were looking at. Even if we weren't, they were. And Malcolm's position as a respected spokesperson for African liberation within the U.S. and his willingness to use that stature to advance the revolutionary struggle, this was dangerous, you all. Malcolm, that last 11 years of his life, he said, I have made errors. I need to adjust my behavior. He wrote letters to Martin Luther King and all the civil rights leaders. I want to work with you. Most of us, our egos wouldn't allow us to publicly acknowledge how confused we were like that. But this man wasn't concerned about his ego. He was concerned about liberation for the African masses. And even if we don't see it, his enemies knew, if this man is willing to be this genuine and sincere about doing this work, he is a threat that must be reckoned with. They understood that clearly based on what he was doing. Yeah, the OAAU only had a few people, but you think that would have been the case for long if he had been able to organize and continue to build capacity? Malcolm knew how to organize and recruit people. He knew how to do that as well as anybody in the world, because he was the one that made a major contribution towards the Nation of Islam growing to the extent that it did. I'm not one of these people saying he did it all by himself, because nobody does anything all by himself, but he made a major contribution to contributing to building the Nation of Islam. And Elijah Muhammad himself said that often. He said that often. It's documented. So all these people coming around today talking, well, Malcolm didn't really do that much in it. Well, you're a lie, because you're all, if you say you follow Elijah Muhammad, he even said that himself back during those times. So we're not entertaining that. There's no question that he was the one in his basement. Muhammad Speaks was put together. He wasn't the only one. I know that Abdul Rahman Muhammad, Jeremiah Shabazz, I know they were down there with him in the basement, but he was a critical component in bringing that addition into existence. He was a critical component to building most of the most influential mosques that the Nation of Islam has. So this man knew how to organize. He would have organized the OAAU, but he didn't have time to live to do that. And he didn't have time because the people who killed him didn't want to give him that time. So the legacy of Malcolm X's Pan-African influence is, even though they killed him, you all, they did not understand that they could not stop the influence that he would have on our movement. Malcolm X had a genuine impact on the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And because of his impact, he almost single-handedly moved them ideologically from the ideas of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and Dr. Martin Luther King, which is how they originated, over to the militant, initially Black nationalist, and then evolving Pan-Africanist perspective that Malcolm was articulating at the time he was killed. As Shukura said, the final speeches of Malcolm X. If you haven't read that book, you can't have a conversation with me about what Malcolm was doing that last year, because you don't know. You don't know. You got to read, that's the last 11 speeches that the man gave in full concert. You can read that, not the last speeches of Malcolm X. That's a separate book. I've read all of them multiple times. So if you want to come and talk to me about this, you better be prepared. I'm not talking about the last speeches. I'm talking about the final speeches of Malcolm X. That's two completely different books of his speeches. The final speeches, the chronological last 11 speeches. Not one of those speeches was he not talking about Pan-Africanism. Check it out for yourself. And because of that influence, when he went to talk to SNCC 2 weeks before he was assassinated, he was talking about Pan-Africanism. That's what he was talking about. And the SNCC people heard that. And it influenced their direction. It broadened their scope. It made them develop more of an international perspective. It made the Black Panther Party for self-defense develop that international perspective. It made the Republic of New Africa develop that international perspective. It made the Revolutionary Action Movement develop that international perspective. All of these folks, all of these organizations credited their understanding of our African connection to Africa and our Africa connection to worldwide imperialism and the destruction of capitalism and imperialism to the articulation of those concepts from El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz Malcolm X. Outstanding contribution. And based on those contributions, it was no longer possible for us to go backwards on the question of Africa. Like, look, I get it. I'm out here organizing, so I don't need you to tell me. I understand. I see you. I hear you. All of you, well, we're indigenous to the Western here. I see all that confusion. Look, I've been doing this work a long time. I've seen all kind of fads and phases come and go. And this one is no different. It's going to come and go because it's not based in truth. It's not based in justice. So it cannot sustain itself. Before it was, there were a lot of different things that came. The Afrocentricity movement, the classless African analysis movement of the 80s and 90s. That's one of them I can think of offhand. That came in there, it was causing such a challenge that if you go on YouTube, there's a debate between Kwame Ture and Molefe Kiti Asante, who is still today considered the chief exponent of Afrocentricity. He wrote a book called Afrocentricity. And Kwame Ture, of course, as a Central Committee member, All African People's Revolutionary Party and Democratic Party of Guinea, clearly one of the chief exponents while he was living for Revolutionary Pan-African. They had a debate. C-SPAN recorded it. It's on C-SPAN, or I'm sorry, on YouTube. You should look at it. And the reason why they had a debate is because this was a challenge for us, because they were constantly challenging primarily our focus on one unified socialist Africa and our focus on Africa being primary. They were like, well, we're primary in New York, we're primary in Los Angeles, and we can't be socialist because that's a white man's ideology. And you don't even know what the Afrocentricity movement is today, because we got through that period and we're still here, and that's gone for the most part. It's still here, but it's not like it was then. So I'm not worried about you people confused about being Indians and indigenous people. You're African people. You're just ashamed of yourself. I get it. You've accepted the enemy's analysis of yourself and you don't want to accept it. And we're coming here to show you who your mother really is. And once we do that, you'll want to be more African than we are. And so Malcolm was the one that gave us the emphasis of that. These little temporary things are not going to set us back. We're moving forward towards Africa. And he made a major contribution towards that. No question about that. And then Malcolm was able to so much help us strengthen our vision for African unity. He was a manifestation of that in his trips to Africa, his work with Sekou Touré, his work with Kwame Nkrumah, his work in Tanzania. He was a critical manifestation of that. His work with revolutionaries around the world. Everywhere in the world you go, and I've traveled all over the world, people know about Malcolm X. There are monuments to Malcolm X in Africa. There's no monuments to Malcolm X in this backward country. There are monuments to Malcolm in Africa. When John Lewis, who was the chairperson of SNCC, went to Guinea in the invitation of Sekou Touré and the Democratic Party of Guinea in 1964, when the SNCC delegation went there, if you read John Lewis's
autobiography. Y'all ain't read it. I'm with John Lewis. I'm not with Kwame Ture. I agree with what Bill Clinton said at John Lewis's funeral. And you ain't even read John Lewis's autobiography. I don't agree with nothing John Lewis said or did, but I read his autobiography because that's how I can say I don't agree with it, because I've studied it. And if you read it, you will know that in John Lewis's autobiography, he said everywhere they went, in Guinea and Africa, the only thing people wanted to know was what their position was in relationship to Malcolm X. That was it. And it got to the point because John Lewis was not a ideological exponent of Malcolm X. That's why he got pushed out of leadership in SNCC. So he just had to say nothing and change the subject because he saw how thick the contradiction was and how strong Malcolm's influence is. Y'all got to understand this, because the point of all this is Malcolm's influence this way is still here today. It hasn't gone anywhere. We don't care that he's been dead 56 years. That's his body that's gone. They can never destroy his ideas and his spiritual influence on our movement. They don't understand that, and a lot of you all don't understand that, but we understand that. They can never destroy what Malcolm represented. And in fact, I would argue that he is stronger today than he ever was. Stronger today than he ever was. So yes, this is his birthday. This is Yuri Kuchiyama's birthday. She gave Malcolm mouth-to-mouth resuscitation when he was shot 16 times on February 1st, 1965. This is Ho Chi Minh's birthday, or Wen Ao Thach, his actual name. He went to school at Columbia University in the 1920s. He stood on the street corners in Harlem where he lived, that Vietnamese man, and he lived there and he listened to Marcus Garvey, and he became a member of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, and he understood the African liberation struggle here and supported it. And Lorraine Hansberry has a birthday today. She did work to advance our people and to contribute and influence me as a writer. So there's no question that it's an important day, and these folks gave their lives to freedom and justice for all of humanity. So we want to thank you for being here. Yes, we're fired up today. We're fired up every day, but we're fired up because we're tired of the lies about our brother Malcolm. We're tired of the lies about our movement. We're tired of people saying that they're for African unity, but they won't even acknowledge African Liberation Day, the highest expression of African unity. We're tired of that. Like, if you don't really care about our unity and all you want to do is make some money, then just be honest enough to say that. You're not fooling some of us anyway, you know? So if you really care about the unity of oppressed people, then you have to uplift institutions like African Liberation Day. You can't just say Juneteenth, because we're not just slaves. We're people with a history and culture. Nothing against Juneteenth. Juneteenth is wonderful. But Juneteenth is only a small fraction of the analysis. African Liberation Day is the whole pie. It's the whole puzzle. It's the whole analysis in history. It's all of it there. So you have to recognize that. And we got to start doing that. And so we want to express in deep passion how important that is. So we close out. We thank you for joining us for this special edition of Sunday workshop seminars. We're going to do the same thing again on Sunday. So if someone didn't see it and you want to tell them, hey, you know, that's worth checking out, Sunday, 4 p.m. Pacific time, as always, we'll be here. We'll do this again. We also have African Liberation Day this weekend. We encourage you, the flyer on the right there, theme forward ever to worldwide Pan-African unity. It's an international webcast. You can go to AfricanLiberationDay.net and register. AfricanLiberationDay.net. You can register, or you can just watch it on Facebook, the A-APRP page, All African People's Revolutionary page, Facebook, All African People's Revolutionary page, Twitter, All African People's Revolutionary page, YouTube. You can watch it on all those channels. So you should do that on Sunday, May 22nd. There's an event. You can get all the details at AfricanLiberationDay.net. And May 25th, there is another event. So please, you should support African Liberation Day. It's not just going to be I'm not talking at all. So if you don't like me, you can come and say, I ain't got to listen to him. That's good. It's going to be organizers on the ground involved in our work all over the world, primarily in Africa, who are letting you know what's going on. So you got to participate, especially if you know some of these people. They don't even want us in Africa. Well, I'm telling you, like, you can come and talk to people who can shred that nonsense for you. So why wouldn't you do that unless you just really don't care? So come on out and do that. And if you're interested in the All African People's Revolutionary Party, APRP-INTL.org. You can contact me at abetterworld.me, and Shukura, contact us at abetterworld.me. And all these videos are housed there. And then we have a number of these podcasts going out, APRP Pantula, Forward Ever podcast, the APRP New Mexico newscast on their Facebook page. Go to APRP New Mexico. That's at 12 p.m. Mountain Time tomorrow, Thursday. So check that out. They're going to be interviewing Sister Mzuri Pambele, who's one of our All African People's Revolutionary Party longtime organizers, All African Women's Revolutionary Union, longtime leader in the union, longtime comrade of mine. I've known and worked with this sister for 40 years and have nothing but utmost respect for her. So you want to tune in, APRP New Mexico, 12 noon tomorrow, when they talk to Mzuri, who is in Southern California, working right now as we speak. I know she is. Buy a guide for organizing defense against white supremacist, patriarchal, and fascist violence. I talked to people in Germany yesterday who were organizing. I'm talking to people all over the world who are getting that book, and I'm working with them to help them organize. I cannot complain. That's what I said I wanted. I said I want to write something that resonates with people all over the world. That is without question happening. So I have to rejoice and prepare myself to do this work. We appreciate each and every one of you. We hope you are well. We hope you benefited from what you heard this evening, and we hope that you can spread it and have people who weren't here come back Sunday. They can hear the same thing. So we appreciate you. We want to wish you a wonderful Wednesday evening. Please participate in African Liberation Day this weekend. Please participate in African Liberation Day this weekend. There are a number of programs. If you don't want to come to the APRP programs, there are a number of other African Liberation Day programs, but just participate. That's what you should do, because that's how we get free, is by getting organized and unified. We appreciate you. Have a great rest of your evening. Forward ever, backwards never. Always stay clever. Smash patriarchy, white supremacy, smash homophobia, capitalism. You already know it's got to go.